Welcome back. My name is Todd, and thanks for swinging by. Hope you're having a wonderful week so far. I'm on the roof of the parking deck at Bellagio, getting ready to hop into a 5-10 game. We're already on the list. They've got a few tables running, so hopefully that means they're going to run for the majority of the evening. It's about 6 p.m. on Sunday, May 8th, so happy Mother's Day. Hope you enjoyed the time with your family as well. Been kind of an up and down month so far, or at the last 6 weeks, I guess. April lost a bunch in the first half of the month, made a bunch of it back near the end of it. And then my final session of April was a 5-10-20 game where I got wrecked for about 5,500. So back to losing on the month. Got back to Vegas about a week ago, and I have been up and down. Won 1,800, lost 2,000, won 300, won 1,800. So kind of a weird string of sessions, but we're hoping to find some run good and get some good footage for you. So with that said, let's hit the felt. I buy into the game for the max of 1,500, and in the first orbit, I lose 2 small pots, requiring me to top back up for an additional $200, so we're into the game for $1,700 in the first 5 minutes. In the first interesting hand, we see an open to 30 from the button, and a call from the small blind. I'm in the big blind with Jack-7 of hearts, which is probably a marginal call multi-way, but the player in the small blind seems a little inexperienced based on what I've seen so far, and the button can be opening pretty wide as it is, so I decide to defend my big blind. The flop is ace-7-4 with a couple of diamonds, and surprisingly the small blind decides to lead into us for $30. He's a younger European player, so I'm not quite sure what to make of this lead, to be completely honest. It could obviously be a top pair holding that he might lead if he's inexperienced, but I've also seen plenty of players lead into an aggressor with drawing hands like a diamond draw, a straight draw with 5-6, or even a weird gutter like 5-3 or worse. So with middle pair here, I decide to go ahead and call. The turn is the 2 of spades, which is a pretty decent brick, and the small blind decides to check it this time, which is kind of surprising. I'm not sure he would check medium to strong top pair holdings, so I begin weighing him towards a diamond draw. We do have middle pair, but we could also stand to use some protection against those flush draws containing 2 overs to our pair, so I land on a bet of 70, and he makes the call. The river is the 4 of spades, which doesn't really change much. Obviously diamonds miss, but I don't think a value bet would get called by much worse, so when he checks, I quickly check behind, and he shows down ace-queen offsuit. Pretty weird play at this level if you ask me, but my initial read of this player being inexperienced is confirmed by not only this hand, but a few others later on. Anyways, I top up again for another 100, and we're in for 1,800 out of the gate. Next up, the under-the-gun player puts on the straddle, and I open ace-5 suited in the cutoff. The straddler defends, so we're heads up to a flop of 10-4 deuce rainbow with a spade. We flop a gutter and a backdoor flush draw. Given our position in this texture, this is a board where our range actually gets some interesting splits between large and small bets. I like to go for the larger sizing and bet roughly 3/4 pot for 80, and he calls. There are plenty of turns that we'll probably have to shut down the bluff on if we don't pick up some additional equity with a spade, but luckily, the 3 of hearts isn't one of those cards. We improve to the second nuts. From a range perspective, we have a lot of hands that are either giving up, switching into equity realization, or continuing to bluff on the larger side to apply adequate pressure. So, to balance, I think a larger size with the value portion of our range is appropriate, and I continue betting, this time for $170. He could certainly continue with a reasonable number of hands, but unfortunately, after a few seconds, he decides this hand isn't worth continuing with, and we take down a nice little pot. In this next one, I open the action to 30 from early position with ace-queen off, and we get a call from the cutoff and both of the blinds. 4 ways to a flop of ace-jack-7 rainbow, and multi-way this might be a good check candidate some of the time, but this board is pretty good for our range and our exact hand, so I decide to continue for 40 when the blinds check it over to me, and surprisingly, every player calls. The turn is the 3 of diamonds, which is sort of a brick. It does bring in a backdoor diamond draw which we unblock, so with a card this disconnected, I think it's appropriate to bet big to charge the litany of draws available and use an overbet sizing of 350. I'm not sure if I would actually use this sizing as a bluff with my combo draws like king-queen, queen-10, or 10-9 of diamonds, considering how multi-way we are, so this might be a bit of a mistake because it's probably unbalanced, but in this game it was my decision, and we take it down. I get moved to one of the main games before getting involved in this next one. We see an open from the hijack to 30, a call from the cutoff, and I have king-jack offsuit in the small blind. At this depth, I think it's best to take the aggressive route from this position, and king-jack isn't the greatest hand in the world, so I decide to 3-bet to 150, the original raiser folds, and the cutoff decides to call again. The flop is queen-jack 10 with 2 hearts, so we flop middle pair, an open-ender, and a backdoor flush draw. We don't have the greatest hand in the world at the moment, but we do have some interesting properties along with a huge range advantage on this board. Usually, when an opponent calls a raise and then calls a re-raise again, they're pretty condensed to the middling pocket pairs like 6s through 10s. In addition to that, because we are the 3-better, we have all of the ace-king holdings while he doesn't. And we also have the king of hearts, which is relevant in negating a handful of potential flush draws in his range. With all that said, we have plenty of equity, and I intend to continue telling the story that I'm strong, so I c-bet for 110, and the cutoff makes the call. The turn helps us out quite a bit. It's the ace of diamonds, giving us the nuts. No need to really slow down on this card, so I continue betting for value, this time for 350, and after about 15 or 20 seconds, our opponent decides to let it go. If you're enjoying the hand so far, please consider hitting the like button to help me and the channel out, and if you're not already subscribed, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any future installments. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for your support. 20 minutes later, we're in the hijack with pocket jacks and open the action to 30. It folds to the small blind, who decides that's not quite enough, and he bumps it up to 130. We're at a depth of roughly 2100, which means we're getting the correct price to set mine if we're behind, and we could still be ahead a good portion of the time if the small blind is using a reasonable 3-betting range. The flop is ace-9-5 with a couple of clubs, and we see a check from the small blind. On an ace-high flop, this can mean a few things, but I think it's most likely we're up against a higher pocket pair than ours because I'd expect to see a bet from most hands we're currently beating. I land on a check, and we head to the turn, which is the 7 of hearts. Our opponent checks again, and I'm still pretty sure he has a hand like queens or kings, so checking again probably makes the most sense, but I throw out a $100 protection bet just in case he has a hand like king-queen of spades or diamonds, and he makes the call. The river pairs the ace, making it more unlikely that we'll be able to credibly rep an ace to bluff the higher pocket pairs, not to mention we have plenty of showdowns, so when he checks a third time, I think it's best just to give up, and I check it back, and we end up losing to pocket kings. I don't think I like this turn bet of $100 given that we're never going to get any better hands to fold, and it's unlikely we'll get called by worse, so let me know in the comments if you're going to make a turn bet for protection or not. About an hour goes by before I'm really able to get involved again. There's a limp for middle position in this one, the low jack raises to 40, the hijack puts in a 3-bet to 110, and I look down at pocket kings on the button. I'd say this is a mandatory 4-bet, so I put in another raise and make it 300 to go. The action folds around to the 3-better, and he makes the call. The flop is 7-5 deuce rainbow, which is about as good as it gets for this hand, considering every pocket pair that gets to the flop is still an overpair, so when the hijack checks, I continue betting for 230, and he calls. The turn is the 9 of diamonds, which doesn't change much. I'm still relatively confident we have the best hand, and our opponent still has an overpair like 10s, jacks, or queens, but unfortunately given the stack to pot ratio, I think it's going to be hard to play a 3-street strategy. If I wanted to try and get 3 streets of value, I'd have to bet really tiny right now to go all in for about half pot on the river, but I think that's a really difficult line to balance with bluffs because the likelihood to get a fold for that price is so low. On the other hand, because we have a less than pot-sized bet left, I think it's best to just go all in now, which is a line I would like to use with some bluffs. Hands like ace-king of diamonds and occasionally ace-5 or ace-4 suited, which all benefit from getting a fold, but still have plenty of equity if they're called. I decide to take this route and go all in for 950. The hijack ends up tanking for about half a minute before ultimately letting it go, and I hear him mutter that he had queens under his breath to his neighbor. So if he's telling the truth, that's a bit unfortunate for us, but oh well. We take down a pretty decent pot in this one. In the following orbit, we're in almost the exact same scenario pre-flop once again. We see an open to 40 from the player in low jack, the hijack decides to 3-bet to 120, and I'm in the cutoff with pocket kings once again. This is still a mandatory 4-bet, so I do just that for 330, and we surprisingly see a quick call from the original raiser who only has about 450 behind. The hijack now begins to tank, and as he's thinking, he starts to act like he's in a tough spot and doesn't really know what to do. The tank, and what feels like a pretty poor attempt at Hollywooding, go on for about a full minute before ultimately the hijack says,
"Come on,"
for about 2,300, which is what we have left in our stack as well. I now go deep into the tank myself and try to decide if I think this player type is really capable of jamming his entire stack given this preflop action with just about anything other than pocket aces. I think about it for a full minute myself and have a handful of things running through my mind in this spot. The low jack has already put over half his stack into the pot, so he's calling off whether I fold or call, meaning I still have to beat both players. I also block a handful of the combos of ace-king because I have pocket kings, so I ultimately decide between playing against two ranges and the hijack most likely holding two aces that a fold is best. As expected, the low jack does call off. We see an ace-high run out, and the low jack shows down ace-queen suited, and the hijack shows ace-king suited. Definitely surprising to see this kind of play with ace-king, especially from this type of player who decided to go all in given his age. But I am happy to have avoided disaster in this hand by letting it go, even though it might have been the wrong fold this time. About an hour later, we see an open from the button to 30, and I look down at ace-7 offsuit in the big blind. This is a pretty marginal hand, but the button can be opening plenty of worse holdings than ours, so I decide to defend. The flop is king-queen-7, so we flop bottom pair, and when I check, the button checks it back pretty quickly. The turn is another 7, giving us trips, and I decide to get tricky with this and check it to the initial aggressor once again. Luckily, our opponent takes the bait and puts in a bet of $50. We have the best version of trips, and I can't imagine we're behind, so I think a check raise makes the most sense, and I raise it to 200. And without much thought, the button puts in the call. The river is the 6 of hearts, which should really only matter if the button has exactly 7-6. But I think plenty of other 7s can still call another large bet, so I bet 340, and we do get a call. I show my hand, and we take down another pot to bring our session back above even. It's getting a little late, and the games are dwindling down, so shortly after this, I decide to rack up, book a good win after hovering around even most of the day, and head home for the night. So that's going to wrap up vlog number 8. We played for about 4.5 hours. It's almost 11 o'clock right now. 4.5 hours, like I said, in for 1,800 and out for 2,500 on the dot. So a nice little $700 win. I'm going to get roasted in the comments for the King's Fold pre-flop. That's probably the first time I've ever done that one. But there's no way that the player type that I was up against is 5-betting. I just didn't think that ace-king was ever going to be in there. So, surprising, and we got bailed out with the ace-high flop anyways, and we would have lost quite a bit of money. So, probably best to just fold there, considering that I don't need to be flipping for my entire stack sometimes, specifically with that kind of read. But that last hand, the ace-7 offsuit hand defense, turning trips, definitely made the session worthwhile. So happy to get away with a pretty decent win and continue to climb out of the hole. If you enjoyed the hands and the session, please hit the like button if you don't mind. If you're not already subscribed, feel free to subscribe for future sessions. And if you are subscribed, thank you so much for the support. I appreciate it. And I'll see you next time in vlog number 9.